The little girl's water glass had been empty for 40 minutes, and she hadn't said a word about it. That was the detail that broke the waitress open. Not the worn shoes, not the carefully folded paper menu the woman kept smoothing with her thumb over and over like a nervous prayer. It was the child, maybe 8 years old, blonde hair pulled into a lopsided ponytail, sitting perfectly still with her hands folded on the table, watching her mother's face the way children watch the sky before a storm. Patient in a way no child should ever have to be patient. Quiet in a way that said she had learned, somewhere along the road, that asking for things only made the pain on her mother's face worse. The restaurant hummed around them. Silverware clinked. Laughter rose and fell from booths near the window. The lunch rush was thinning out, and most of the staff were already resetting tables and thinking about the end of their shifts. But those two, the woman in the red wrap dress and the little girl in the turquoise cardigan, had been sitting at table 9 for over an hour, and they had ordered nothing but 2 glasses of water. If this story already has you feeling something, please take a moment right now to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who believes in kindness and second chances. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story that reminds you what it means to be human. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from? We love knowing our community spans every corner of this earth. Her name was Marlena Voss, 34 years old, though she looked both younger and older than that depending on the light. Younger in the soft curve of her jaw, older in the shadows beneath her eyes that no amount of sleep had been able to erase in the past 3 months. She had been beautiful once in a way that turned heads, and she was still beautiful now, but it was the kind of beauty that had been through something and come out the other side carrying weight that didn't show on the surface. She sat with her back straight and her chin up because she had decided that morning, standing in the parking lot of the shelter with her daughter's hand in hers, that she would not let herself collapse in public. She would hold it together. She was good at holding it together. She had been holding it together since the night Marcus packed 2 duffel bags and walked out of the apartment they could no longer afford without his income, leaving behind a stack of overdue notices and a daughter who still asked for him every single night before bed. The little girl's name was Petra. She had her father's eyes, wide and gray and startlingly clear, and her mother's stubbornness, which she wore like armor even at 8 years old. She had figured out, with the quiet intelligence of a child who has been paying close attention, that something was very wrong with their lives. She knew they had left their apartment. She knew they were staying somewhere with bunk beds and a lady named Miss Carroll who smelled like peppermint and handed out toothbrushes in paper bags. She knew that her mother cried in the shower so Petra wouldn't hear, but Petra heard anyway, and she had decided, with all the fierce, wordless love that lives in the hearts of children, that she was not going to make it worse. She would not ask for things. She would not complain. She would sit at this table and be very, very good, and maybe that would help somehow. They had come into the restaurant because it was February, and the temperature had dropped sharply after noon, and the shelter didn't open its doors again until 4 o'clock. Marlena had exactly $11 in her wallet. She had done the math twice, standing outside in the cold, and she knew that $11 was not enough for 2 meals, and so she had walked Petra inside with a bright, convincing smile and said they were just going to sit and warm up for a little while, just waiting. That was the word she used, waiting. As if there were somewhere else to be, something else coming. As if waiting were a choice, rather than the only option left. She kept her eyes on the table mostly. Occasionally, she looked at the menu, not because she could order anything, but because holding the menu gave her hand something to do and her face a reason to be looking down. She was aware of the other diners the way you are aware of people when you are ashamed, hyper-conscious of their ease, their laughter, the casual way they flagged down servers and ordered things without calculating, without the hollow arithmetic of survival. The man at the table beside them in the blue shirt had left half a plate of food untouched. She had noticed that. She had looked away immediately, furious at herself for noticing. Petra had noticed too. But Petra said nothing. The waitress who had been watching them was named Solange Reyes. She was 26, worked double shifts 3 days a week, and had grown up in a house where her mother kept a jar of change on the counter labeled for the hard weeks because hard weeks came as reliably as seasons. She knew what sitting somewhere warm when you had nowhere else to go looked like because she had done it herself at 12 in a McDonald's on Route 9 while her mother made phone calls in the parking lot trying to find a cousin who would take them in. She recognized it the way you recognize an old song, not by thinking about it, but somewhere deeper, in the chest. Immediate and certain. She refilled Petra's water glass without being asked. She did it on her way past, casual, as if she were refilling every glass in the room, and she smiled at the little girl without making it a big thing. Petra looked up at her with those wide gray eyes and said thank you in a voice so small and so sincere that Solange had to keep walking so her face wouldn't give her away. She went to the back and stood by the coffee station for a moment, thinking. Her manager that afternoon was a man named Dov Steinhardt, mid-50s, ex-military, ran the front of house with a kind of structured efficiency that could seem cold until you'd worked with him long enough to understand that it was actually care in a different language. He was standing near the host stand going over reservation sheets when Solange approached him. She explained quietly what she had observed. She told him about the water glass. She told him about the way the little girl sat with her hands folded. She told him she wanted to put in an order for them, something warm, something filling, and she would cover it from her own tips. Dov Steinhardt was quiet for a moment. Then he took the reservation sheet she was holding, set it on the stand, and said he would take care of it. His voice was the same as always, measured, flat, but there was something behind it that had shifted. He walked toward the kitchen without another word. What happened in the next 20 minutes was not dramatic. That is important to say. It did not happen with fanfare or announcement. Nobody made a speech. The restaurant did not fall silent and applaud. Life is rarely like that, and the kindnesses that matter most rarely announce themselves. What happened was this. A bowl of chicken soup appeared at table 9, accompanied by a basket of warm bread and a small plate of sliced fruit. It was set down gently by Solange, who told Marlena simply that the kitchen had made extra today and it would go to waste otherwise. She said it the way you say something that you both know isn't exactly true, but that gives the other person the dignity of accepting it. Marlena looked at the food. She looked at Solange. Her chin was still up, but her eyes had gone bright and uncertain, and the careful composure she had been maintaining since the parking lot that morning was doing something complicated behind her face. She started to say something, started to protest, started to insist they were fine, they were just waiting, and then Petra said "Mama" in a voice that was barely a whisper, and that was the end of it. Marlena nodded. She pressed her lips together and nodded once, and Solange gave her a small, quiet smile and moved away. Petra ate with the focused, unhurried gratitude of someone who had learned not to take warm food for granted. She tore the bread carefully and dipped it in the soup and ate every piece of fruit on the plate. Marlena ate more slowly, watching her daughter, and the expression on her face was one of those expressions that doesn't have a clean name. Somewhere between grief and relief and love so overwhelming it functions almost like pain. She had spent 3 months in survival mode, moving through each day in a kind of locked-down emergency state. And sometimes in that state you forget, for long stretches, what it feels like to be seen by another person, to have someone notice, to have a stranger look at your situation and respond with warmth instead of discomfort or judgment or deliberate non-seeing. She had felt invisible for a long time. She didn't feel invisible right now. The afternoon shifted. The restaurant quieted. A few tables turned over. Outside, clouds moved across the pale February sky and the temperature dropped another degree or two. But inside table 9 it was warm, and Petra had taken a small notepad from her mother's purse and was drawing something with a stubby pencil. A house, with a big window and a tree in the yard. The kind of house she had been drawing her whole life. The way children draw houses, as symbols of safety rather than architecture, Marlena watched her daughter draw and thought about the year that had brought them here. She thought about the job she'd lost when the marketing company downsized in October. She thought about the 2 months she'd spent sending applications into what felt like a void, watching the savings drain away with a slow inevitability that was somehow worse than a sudden crisis. The slow kind gave you too much time to think. She thought about the morning she'd had to call a number she'd found on a community board and speak to a woman named Miss Carroll, and how she had sat in her car afterward for 20 minutes before she could trust herself to drive. She thought about Petra's face that first night at the shelter, taking everything in with those careful gray eyes, and how her daughter had simply taken her hand and said, "It's okay, Mama, it's like camping." And how that small grace, that extraordinary small grace, had almost destroyed her. She had made a mistake, she thought, in believing that needing help was the same as failing. She had carried that belief like a stone in her chest for months, letting it weigh her down, letting it keep her from reaching out sooner, from calling her sister in Tucson, from walking into the shelter before the money had completely run out. She had thought that if she could just solve it alone, quietly, without anyone knowing, then it wouldn't count as the thing she was afraid it was. She had thought endurance was the same as strength. It wasn't. She understood that now with a clarity that felt like it had been purchased at great cost. At some point in the mid-afternoon, an older woman who had been sitting alone near the window, gray-haired, wearing a green coat, the kind of woman who looked like she had lived a lot of life and paid attention to all of it, stopped by table 9 on her way out. She looked at Petra's drawing and said it was a very fine house. Petra said thank you and showed her the tree she'd added, with round apples in the branches even though it was winter. The woman smiled at that, at the apples in February, and said that was exactly the right way to draw a tree. Then she pressed a folded piece of paper into Marlena's hand, lightly, without ceremony, the way you pass someone something you want them to have without making it awkward, and she walked out before Marlena could respond. Marlena looked at the paper when the woman was gone. It was a name and a phone number, with 3 words written below them in careful script. She hires well. She read it twice. She folded it very carefully and put it in the zip pocket of her purse where she kept the things she couldn't afford to lose. Petra looked up from her drawing and asked who the woman was. Marlena said she didn't know. Petra thought about that for a moment and then said she thought the woman had kind eyes. Marlena said she thought so too. And then she looked at her daughter, this small, extraordinary person who had borne months of disruption and uncertainty with a grace that humbled her daily, and felt something shift in her chest, not the fixed, solved feeling of a problem resolved, something quieter than that, the tentative, fragile sensation of a door opening slightly, of light coming through at an angle. She thought about what her mother used to say back home in Pennsylvania when things went hard. The kindness of strangers is God moving in disguise. She had always found that phrase a little sentimental, a little too easy. She didn't find it easy anymore. She found it accurate. Before they left, Solange came back one more time. She brought a small paper bag, a container of soup to go, 2 dinner rolls wrapped in foil, 2 chocolate chip cookies. She set it on the table and said it was from the kitchen. She didn't explain further. Marlena looked at her for a moment, and there are looks between strangers that contain whole conversations, that say things neither party has the language for in the ordinary run of words. This was one of those looks. Then Marlena said thank you in a way that meant far more than the words, and Solange said of course in a way that meant I see you and I hope things get better and you're not invisible, and all of it, all at once. They walked out into the cold February afternoon, Petra holding the paper bag carefully with both hands, Marlena with her chin still up, something subtly different in her posture now. Not fixed, not resolved, but something. The small, stubborn, irreplaceable something that happens when a person who has felt alone for a long time is reminded, without condition or spectacle, that they are not. Petra looked up at her mother on the sidewalk and asked what they were going to do now. Marlena looked down at her daughter's gray eyes, the apples in February optimism of her face, and she said they were going to the shelter, And then tomorrow, they were going to make a phone call. And after that, things were going to start to change. She said it the way you say something when you have decided to believe it, not because the evidence is conclusive, but because the alternative is a weight you refuse to keep carrying. Petra nodded. She slipped her hand into her mother's. They walked, and in the restaurant behind them, at a table that had been cleared and wiped and reset for the dinner rush, there was no evidence left that they had ever been there. No sign, no trace, nothing that would tell the next guests what that corner of the room had held that afternoon. What courage had sat there, what hunger, what love, what quiet dignity in the face of a life temporarily derailed. Except that Solange knew. Dov Steinhardt knew. The woman in the green coat knew wherever she was now, and sometimes that is exactly the right number of people. 3 months later, Marlena Voss started her first day at a mid-sized communications firm on the 4th floor of a building downtown. She wore the red wrap dress. Petra started 3rd grade in a school 6 blocks from the apartment they'd moved into in April. Small, 2 rooms, the walls still smelling faintly of fresh paint. The first thing Petra hung on her bedroom wall was a drawing of a house with a tree outside and apples in the branches. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or a time you needed grace and found it, or a moment when you had the chance to be the person who noticed, please leave a comment right now and tell us what you're feeling. Those comments aren't just words on a screen. They are proof that stories like this matter, that the people who lived something like this are not forgotten. Drop a comment below telling us, have you ever been shown unexpected kindness by a stranger, or have you ever been the one to offer it? We want to hear your story, and if this video touched your heart, please share it with one person today, just one, who might need to hear it. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and help us keep telling the stories that remind us what we're capable of on both sides of the table, because kindness is never wasted, and no one who is seen, truly seen, stays invisible forever.